Have you ever had that persistent, silent feeling that you are wasting your life? No matter how hard you try to keep yourself busy, surrounded by people, goals, obligations, deep down, it feels like something essential is missing, as if you are merely existing, not truly living. Perhaps you have tried to explain this as anxiety. Maybe a doctor has called it depression, and perhaps they prescribed something to silence that discomfort. A pill in the morning, another at night, and time goes by, numbing what you should be urgently listening to. But what if I told you that this suffering is not a mistake? What if I told you that it is not something to be suppressed, but rather a calling? Carl Jung, one of the greatest names in depth psychology, believed that what we call mental disorder is often not a pathology. It is an attempt by the psyche to heal itself. A warning that your life, as it is, does not serve your soul. You may be living a routine that was imposed on you, a job that consumes you, relationships that drain your energy, dreams that aren't even yours. Meanwhile, your essence screams for freedom. But no one taught you to listen to that scream. On the contrary, they taught you to silence it, to function, to adapt, to not disturb. And so, you become ill in silence, while the world applauds your productivity. This is where Jung comes in. For him, healing does not come from denial, but from diving in. It is not about masking the symptoms, but understanding what they are trying to say. Because, in Jung's own words, neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. In other words, you are sick because you are running away from the pain you need to feel to transform your life. As long as you keep running, you will keep suffering. This video is not for those who want distraction. It is for those who are tired of pretending, for those who feel they are sinking, but still hold a spark of hope that there is a way. And there is. But it starts with a brutal decision. To stop running and start listening. Listening to yourself. Listening to the unconscious. Listening to the pain you tried to silence with medication, with addictions, with routines. If you have made it this far, you may have already realized that emptiness you feel is not weakness. It is the absence of yourself in your own life, and it is time to change that. You have been feeling sad for days, weeks, maybe months. You go to the doctor. He listens to you for 15 minutes, if he listens at all. You talk about insomnia, anxiety, the tightness in your chest that appears for no reason, about the constant feeling of being out of place, disconnected from your own existence. He nods, types a few words on the computer, and then comes the verdict. It's anxiety. Let's start with this medication. Done. In a few days or weeks, your pain has been reduced to a chemical imbalance, and what was an existential cry becomes a number on a prescription label. What no one tells you is that this type of treatment is not interested in your soul. It is interested in your functionality. The logic is simple. You need to keep working, consuming, producing, keeping the gears of the system turning. The medication allows you to endure the unbearable, and that's why it is offered as a definitive solution. But this solution, as Jung said, is a trap. Jung believed that most modern neuroses do not arise from an internal failure of the brain, but from the disconnection between the life we lead and the life we should be living. When you ignore your vocation, your most authentic impulses, your inner truths, the soul begins to sicken. And since it has no literal voice, it speaks through the body and mind. Anxiety, panic attacks, hopelessness. But instead of listening to it, we are trained to silence it, to neutralize any discomfort with chemicals, to return to normal as quickly as possible. But what is this normal? A job you hate but can't quit. Superficial relationships that serve to maintain appearances, empty goals, mechanical routines, and a constant feeling that you are surviving, instead of living. The anxiety you feel is not a failure. It is your soul telling you, this life is not yours. You are betraying me. And if you ignore this for too long, the body starts to scream louder. But the system is always ready with a new dose, a new label, a new sedative. And the more you adapt to this model, the further you distance yourself from yourself, until you feel nothing anymore, neither pain nor pleasure. Just this chronic numbness they call adult life. Carl Jung warned that by medicating the symptom without understanding its root, we create an illusion of healing. The person improves on the outside, but inside remains lost. And in the long run, this division between what is felt and what is lived generates an even greater collapse. Because there is no way to escape the soul forever, it will demand its price, whether in the form of burnout, emotional collapses, or through an emptiness that nothing, absolutely nothing, can fill. This mass medicalization is a reflection of something deeper, a culture that does not know how to deal with suffering, that fears pain because it has lost the sense of its transformative value. For Jung, suffering was necessary. It was the beginning of the journey. It was the call to individuation. But in modern society, any discomfort is labeled as pathological. And by fleeing from suffering, we also flee from the chance to become who we should be. The question that remains is, how many people are being silenced by treatments that merely camouflage the problem? How many lives are being wasted in the name of artificial stability? How many journeys have been interrupted before they even began? To start answering this, we need to look at what lies behind modern emotional collapse. And this leads us to the next point, the environment we live in, the cultural structures that shape our identity, and the lifestyle that is often the true illness. Because perhaps the problem was never you, but the world that taught you to hate yourself. Let's talk about that in the next part. I'd like to quickly thank everyone for the 100,000 subscribers. Thank you very much. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe and follow our videos. Let's keep going. Have you ever wondered why so many people are suffering emotionally, even surrounded by material comfort, technology, and supposed freedoms? We have never had such access to information, entertainment, and stimuli. And at the same time, we have never been so disconnected from ourselves. The root of modern psychological suffering is not only within the mind, it is in the environment that shapes us from birth. Carl Jung understood this with brutal clarity. For him, the problem was not just individual. It was cultural. It was structural. We live in a society that glorifies appearance but neglects essence, that rewards efficiency but ignores the soul. From an early age, we are shaped to follow a script: study, choose a safe career, be productive, consume, smile for photos, and hide any signs of vulnerability. We grow up being taught to please, to compete, to win. But no one teaches us to listen to our intuition, to understand our feelings, to ask ourselves, what makes my life worth living? This absence of meaning is not a coincidence. It is programmed. We have been conditioned to believe that our identity comes from outside, from the title we carry, the salary we receive, the approval we earn. But Jung knew that this is a fatal trap. Because when the value you see in yourself depends on external standards, you are permanently exposed to frustration. And worse, you distance yourself from your inner nature, from your unconscious, from your soul. And that is where the emptiness begins to grow. Slowly, silently, it takes over your routine. You meet all the expectations, check off all the items on the list, but still feel out of place. You feel like you are living someone else's life, that something is wrong, but you can't explain what. What you are feeling is not weakness, it is disconnection. Disconnection from what is true, spontaneous, instinctive. And this disconnection, according to Jung, is what fuels the deepest psychological disturbances. But society does not want you to realize this. Because disconnected people are easier to control. They consume more, question less, follow orders without resistance. They are useful, they are docile, they are predictable. And when they finally collapse, when anxiety, depression, or burnout hit them hard, the system responds with palliatives, never with the truth. Jung said that to heal, the individual needs to confront the world that hurt them. They need to understand how they were conditioned, what was repressed, what was sacrificed in the name of acceptance. And this is a painful task, because it involves admitting that you lived a life that was not yours, that you shaped yourself to fit into a mold that suffocated you, that you were domesticated by a culture that fears the human soul. But it is also the only way out, because only by recognizing the origin of your emptiness can you begin the journey to fill it with truth. And this journey has a name: individuation, the deep and transformative process that Jung believed to be the true path to healing. In the next part, we will dive into this journey. What does it mean to individuate? How is it possible to integrate the forgotten parts of oneself and finally build a meaningful life? The answer requires courage, but also surrender. Let's move forward. There comes a moment in life when pain can no longer be ignored, when the social mask begins to weigh too heavily, when you realize you are living as if you are only half, or worse, a caricature of who you truly are. It is at this breaking point that, according to Carl Jung, the most important journey a human being can undertake begins, the journey of individuation. But what does it really mean to individuate? Jung was not talking about cheap self-help or small habit changes. He referred to a deep, almost mythical process in which the individual ceases to be a reflection of the external world, of family, culture, others' expectations, and begins to become what they are, in essence. Individuation is the path to psychic wholeness. It is when you stop being what others expect of you and start becoming what your soul is asking for. And this process is not linear, nor comfortable, quite the opposite. It requires you to confront everything that has been repressed, ignored, or denied within yourself. What Jung called the personal unconscious reveals itself at this point: unresolved traumas, suffocated desires, inherited beliefs that have never been questioned. Individuation begins when you decide to stop fleeing from these parts and start integrating them. But that is just the beginning. Because the most challenging step of individuation, and perhaps the most painful, is the encounter with the shadow. That dark, instinctive, animalistic, and chaotic side that you have learned to hide. The anger you never expressed. The envy you pretend not to feel. The impulses that shame you. Jung said, "Those who look outside, dream. Those who look inside, awaken." And looking inside means facing your shadow without masks, without excuses, without moralism. Why is this so important? Because the shadow, if ignored, controls you without you realizing it. But if integrated, it becomes a source of power, of authenticity, of vital energy. It is only possible to live a true life when you stop fighting against yourself and start reconciling with everything that inhabits you. Individuation is that, the reconstruction of inner unity, the reconnection with the self, the regulating center of the psyche, the living wholeness that you are in potential. And here lies the great irony. While the world says you need to improve, Jung said you need to become whole. No longer perfect, but real. No longer fitting, but free. The healing you seek is not in fitting better into the world, but in aligning your inner world with the truth of your being. This process can be lonely. It can be arduous, but it is also the only one that offers real meaning to existence. Because when you start living from your center, everything changes. Your choices change, your relationships change, your way of suffering changes. Suffering ceases to be a punishment and becomes part of a deeper transformation. But here arises an inevitable question. Why do so many people live distant from this journey? Why do so many remain anesthetized, repeating patterns, avoiding confrontation with their own soul? The answer lies in the root of modern suffering, the absence of meaning. A silent epidemic that corrodes from within even those who seem fine. This is what we will talk about in the next part. Because perhaps your pain is not a problem. Perhaps it is a symptom of a much deeper truth, that your life until now did not have a clear purpose. But this can and must change. Stop and look around you. How many people do you know who seem to be merely existing, not living? How many follow an automatic routine marked by empty commitments, superficial distractions, and a fatigue that no amount of sleep can resolve? Carl Jung knew that this type of suffering was not casual. It was structural. It was existential. According to him, much of the psychological suffering of modern humans comes from a single and brutal realization. Life has lost its meaning. And we are not talking about meaning as a grand cosmic mission or an unattainable utopia. We are talking about personal purpose, about alignment between what one does and who one is, about living according to an internal truth, and not under the external demands of a world that idolizes success but kills the soul. Jung observed in his patients that the deepest symptoms, anxiety, depression, apathy, anguish, often disappeared when the individual began to build a meaningful life. Not when they took medication, not when they made money, but when they found a why. Because deep down, you can endure almost any pain if you know why you are living. But without that meaning, even the most intense pleasures become mundane. Even the most ambitious goals sound empty. And that is exactly what we are experiencing today. An epidemic of emptiness. People tired not just from an excess of tasks, but from a lack of purpose. Lives full of commitments, but poor in direction. Jung understood that humans need to feel part of something greater than themselves. They need to feel that their existence has weight, consequence, and meaning. Without this, they collapse internally. Suffering turns into disorientation. The soul cries out for a path, but all the world offers are distractions. Likes, series, self-help promises, productivity techniques, miraculous courses, all trying to fill a void that can only be filled with truth. And the truth is that many are living a life they did not choose. They were pushed into paths that please others but betray them internally. They chose professions that have no connection to their values. They maintain relationships that weaken them. They inhabit cities that suffocate them. They repeat routines that erase them day after day. And the body feels it. The mind collapses. The soul contracts. There is no remedy for the absence of meaning. Because what is missing is not serotonin. It is direction. It is not dopamine. It is identity. And this is where Jung's deep psychology becomes urgent. Because he did not simply want people to function. He wanted them to live authentically. To have the courage to say, "This life is not mine, and I refuse to continue like this." But how to do that? How to start rebuilding meaning when everything around you seems designed to distract you from your essence? Jung had an answer. The reconnection with the unconscious. Because it is there, in the forgotten parts of oneself, that the key to your purpose resides. And that is what we will explore in the next part. How the unconscious, far from being just a repository of traumas, can become your greatest ally in healing. Because perhaps what you most avoid facing is exactly what you need to discover in order to finally live with meaning. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebook, Beyond the Shadow. It breaks down Jung's core ideas and gives you tools to understand yourself more deeply. Link is in the pinned comment. Most people want to heal, but almost no one is willing to pay the price of healing. Because, contrary to what common sense sells, true transformation does not begin with positive affirmations or the creation of new habits. It begins with a confrontation, a dive, a descent into the depths of one's own soul. And that is precisely what Carl Jung taught us. There is no healing without contact with the unconscious. But what is this unconscious? For Jung, it was not a mere repository of repressed memories or past traumas. It was an entire universe, vast, symbolic, that holds all the parts of us that have been forgotten, denied, abandoned. Our most authentic impulses, our deepest fears, our most painful truths. Everything you tried to ignore is there, waiting. And why does this matter? Because what you do not face in the unconscious begins to govern your life without you realizing it. Jung clearly stated, what you do not bring to consciousness returns as fate. You think you have bad luck in love, but you unconsciously repeat the same patterns. You think you are sabotaged at work, but you unconsciously fear success. You think you are a victim of the world, but you are being controlled by old traumas that you have never confronted. The unconscious is like a dark mirror. It reflects exactly who you are, not who you would like to be. And that is why it is frightening. Because it shows truths that hurt. Because it reveals the facade of the masks you created to survive. Because it demands that you abandon the fantasy of control and embrace the reality of your inner complexity. But here lies the paradox. It is precisely in this confrontation that healing resides. Because the more you deny the unconscious, the more it dominates you. The more reactive, impulsive, and fragmented you become. On the other hand, the more you integrate it, the more whole you become. Jung called this process the expansion of consciousness, and it only happens when you stop running away and start listening. How to do this? Through dreams, symbols, art, silence, meditation, analysis. The unconscious does not speak with logic. It speaks with images, with sensations, with emotions that seemingly arise from nowhere. But it is not nothing. It is you. It is the part of you that was locked away, waiting to be recognized. And when you begin to listen to this part, something changes. You start to see yourself more clearly, to understand your decisions, to embrace your wounds, and above all, to reclaim your power. Because as long as you do not know what inhabits you, you are a hostage of others, of the past, of expectations, of culture. But when you courageously dive into the unconscious, you begin to free yourself. You understand that the anxiety that paralyzes you is not an enemy. It is a message. That the sadness that visits you is not weakness. It is a sign that something needs to die for something new to be born. This process is demanding. It requires time, patience, depth. It requires you to abandon the comfort of the surface. But it is also the only path that leads to authenticity. And it is from this authenticity that you rebuild your life, no longer as a puppet of the unconscious, but as a conscious creator of your own destiny. Now that you understand the central role of the unconscious in your pain and transformation, one last question needs to be asked. What is preventing you from starting this journey? Why do so many people, even aware of all this, remain paralyzed, living on autopilot, repeating the same meaningless life? The answer lies in fear the fear of change, in the fear of loss, in the fear of abandoning everything that is familiar, even if it is destructive. In the next and final part, we will talk about this fear and about the hardest and most liberating choice you will need to make to stop wasting your life. Because in the end, you either live anesthetized or you awaken. There is no middle ground. There comes a moment when you need to make a choice. Not just any choice, but the choice. The one that separates who you are from who you were conditioned to be. The one that defines whether you will continue living a borrowed, anesthetized, empty life, or if you will finally commit to the most serious promise anyone can make, the commitment to your own soul. If you have made it this far, it is not by chance. Something inside you is awakening. It may still be a whisper, or it may already be screaming. But it is there, and this call will not disappear, because it comes from the deepest, most honest, most alive part of who you are. The part that refuses to accept that life is just work, obligations, distractions, and survival. The part that knows, even without being able to explain, that there is something more, something that is waiting for you. But it will only reveal itself if you have the courage to walk towards yourself. Carl Jung said that the greatest privilege of life is to become who you really are. But he also knew that this is the most avoided path, because it requires you to abandon everything that is comfortable, predictable, and superficial. It demands that you face deep fears, confront your shadows, question everything you were taught as truth. But that is precisely why this path is sacred. Because it transforms, because it truly heals. Most people will continue on autopilot. They will prefer numbness to clarity. They will keep accumulating possessions, distractions, likes, while inside they rot in silence. But you don't have to be another statistic. You can choose. Choose to stop wasting your existence. Choose to come out of anesthesia. Choose to build a life that makes sense. A life that is yours. I'm not saying it will be easy. It won't. It will hurt. It will confuse. It will require breakups, but it will also liberate. And there is nothing more powerful than an awakened soul. Because when you start living according to who you really are, you become unshakable. You stop asking for permission. You stop comparing yourself. You stop losing yourself trying to please those who will never understand you. So now I ask you, what do you need to let go of to start truly living? What is the lie you are still telling yourself? Comment below. It doesn't matter if it's a sentence, a confession, or a question. The simple act of writing is already a step out of numbness. It is already a gesture of presence, of choice, of awakening. And if this video moved you, if some part touched a wound or ignited a spark, then you need to watch the next video. Not because it is a continuation, but because it is important. Because if you have made it this far, it is because you are ready to go even deeper. And now, more than ever, it is time to continue.